Organizations and people should work together to improve informal settlements. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to the second one. Second presenter. Marianne. She is also recording.
Yes, I will be sharing the second presentation now. Just give me a second.
The second presentation is from Angola Development Workshop. The topic is COVID-19 and Angola's slums. Please share. Pre-recording.
For the NGO Development Workshop Angola. I am here to present you a paper that I co-authored with João Domingos and Alan Kane, my colleagues from DW. The study is based on a research into the impact of COVID-19 on Angola slums and on a participatory slum upgrading initiative that DW is implementing with UN Habitat in Angola. So let's start with some very current statistics. New data shows that COVID-19 is now a developing country pandemic in terms of infections, death rates, but also the socioeconomic fallout. And cities in the global south are the epicenter of this. And considering this context, slum settlements are the most at-risk areas in the world. This is for a variety of commonly known reasons, such as lack of clean water and sanitation, lack of adequate living space, because by definition, slums are deprived urban areas, often not recognized as an integral part of a city, and whose inhabitants have inadequate housing and access to basic urban services. This is borrowing from a definition by UN Habitat. Currently, about 1 in 8 people on the planet live in slums, and in the global south, every third person lives in a slum. This is even more accentuated in Angola, where an estimated 40% live in slums. That means that a significant portion of humanity lives in areas that are extremely vulnerable to the spread of infectious disease, and where addressing a contagion is very complex. But these communities cannot be scapegoats of authorities, media, society, in the fight against COVID-19, because more than overcrowding and hygiene or bad hygiene, it is bad governance that makes informal settlements more prone to being hotspots due to lack of basic services and poverty as a result of marginalization by governments and the larger society. And that is also why little data exists on these areas, with some exceptions in India, Brazil, or Kenya. Very little is known about the Angolan slums as well, even though nearly half of the country lives in them. And this lack of knowledge makes designing appropriate interventions very, very difficult, and also further alienates them to the outside world. So UN Habitat and its partners have developed the Participatory Slum Upgrading Program, PSUP, which is a framework that aims to change the mindset around slums and engage them as the dynamic urban hubs they are, crucial in the city's functioning. And in our paper, we provide a roadmap for doing COVID-19 research and mitigation with and within the slum to bring upgrading and inform public policy as well, based on our experience in Angola. And just a quick note, we acknowledge that there's no silver bullet solution and that PSUP can only be a part of the puzzle in improving lives of slum dwellers. This approach has been criticized for potentially causing gentrification or provoking tensions between governments and communities, but we believe that it is still a model worthy of exploring theoretically and in practice, and we hope that by sketching out a few examples here, we may open a space for discussion and fine-tuning. So the research question of our study was, what is the impact of COVID-19 and related pandemic policies on slums in Angola? The study was conducted during 6 months in 2020 through telephone interviews, 1,600 of them, and 45% of the participants were women. The sample included all 18 provinces, but was weighted toward urban centers with supposedly higher COVID-19 transmission and where the levels of informal settlements are higher. The participants were water point caretakers that DW had worked with previously, but the vast majority were microcredit clients whose contacts were provided by a partner organization. So this signals a certain bias in the study because the sample is not fully representative. The participants had to own a phone, and most had to have a certain level of income as microcredit clients. We focused on 4 main areas, notably housing, household economy, COVID-19 awareness and prevention, and health. These are some of the topics that we covered through a multiple choice questionnaire, and I'll focus here on the results from the economic section and opinion on emergency policies. One of the most interesting findings was that employment in the slums did not drop as much as many feared since the pandemic started, and no significant difference was noted between males and females. Nearly 90% of respondents were economically active, and only 3% reported having lost work since the pandemic started. We assume this is due to the high level of informality in Angolan society. Currently, it stands at 80% of all working Angolans who are engaged in the informal economy, up from 72% in 2019. So the year of the pandemic absorbed more workers into the informal economy. Let's talk about income. Although employment among the study sample held constant since the onset of the pandemic, households found themselves with lower income. Our hypothesis is that this drop is due to official restrictions on commerce, services, and movement as well. And many of these households are involved in commercial activities or offering transportation services, hence they were severely impacted. It is interesting to note that the 2 largest cities, Luanda and Benguela, registered a more severe drop in incomes than the regional cities of Wish and Wambo. One explanation for this is that the enforcement of restrictions was greater in larger cities, and especially in Luanda. But the more rural provinces of Wambo and Wish also have a greater availability of alternative forms of subsistence, such as small-scale farming, which provides them with food or extra means of income when regular work opportunities are curtailed. In terms of expenses, half of the households have spent more since the onset of the pandemic. We think it's mainly rooted in the hike in prices of basic goods and services that has happened since the beginning of the pandemic for various reasons. And a third of participants reported having spent less, likely as a result of lower incomes, but also as the nationwide lockdown decreased spending on transportation, for instance. And lastly, most households have not received any help during the pandemic to offset some of the hardship. Only 1% received any form of government help during this time, meaning that the government resources to help the poor that are advertised in national media have a hard time trickling down to these communities. We also asked about the COVID-19 emergency measures and how they are viewed. We noticed a significant disapproval with the closing of public spaces and markets. In the same vein, nearly 80% of households reported being negatively affected by the closing of markets. This is possibly related to the fact that not only do slum dwellers mostly do their shopping in markets or on the street, but also because many of them earn income by selling in these spaces that were targeted by the government bans. So to sum it up, our data confirms that a large part of the slum households have felt the socioeconomic fallout from the blanket curfews and shutdowns. The study has shown that financial vulnerability has increased among the slum dwellers, and a large proportion of the slum dwellers showed a clear disapproval for policies restricting commerce and market sale. We argue that these policies not only increase hardship, but they're also counterproductive because they oftentimes increase the risk of super spreading through overcrowding on the days that sale is allowed, for instance. So PSUP applies to this situation in different ways, proposing solutions for a community-driven pandemic response, but also long-term slum upgrading, in designing public policy that impacts slums, such as lockdowns or bans on informal sale. PSUP promotes engaging all relevant stakeholders in decision-making, even though this might be less efficient. DW has put this into practice in managing water resources in the community. We brought together to one table neighborhood representatives, municipal administration, municipal directorates of energy and water, and other interested partners to deliberate about the best solution for the community. Next, capacity building and strengthening resilience can be done through local care groups that DW has trained to do COVID-19 awareness, and could be also converted into emergency cells to plan urgent response in case of a larger outbreak in a community, for instance. We have also trained seamsters to sew hygienic masks, and we've trained soap makers to make soap out of recycled oil to promote hygiene, self-reliance, and sustainability. We also organize within the facet of knowledge co-production. Historically, DW has been engaged in community mapping, which are a popular tool, again, across the world in the pandemic context. They were invited to identify public spaces that could be used as isolation or vaccination centers, for instance, increasing preparedness for an outbreak. And monitoring and evaluation, of course, regular follow-up surveys are important, such as, and also data validation, which DW has performed traditionally with all stakeholders and made community approved data easily available. So, Tua Pandula, we thank you for your attention, and I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. These are some of our references, and our research was made possible with the support of UN Habitat and the European Union.
Okay. Thank you, Marianne. And let's move to the last speaker. He's live. He's live, Doug, from UN Habitat, Kenya. Doug, are you live? Are you online?
I'm live. Yes.
Okay,
yes,
good.
I am.
Great.
I am just finding my presentation, and there we go. Make sure
Okay,
it
you
works.
have 12 minutes, and
Okay.
I will inform you at 10 minutes. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here as both a UN representative, UN Habitat, as well as a student at Carleton University. Our presentation, and a presentation by three of us, Amandine, myself, and Olga, and we'll split the presentation between the three, is on youth-led response to COVID-19 in informal settlements. It's a case study on the youth-led response that was started last March by youth groups that we partner with here in Nairobi, and then expanded beyond to Kenya and then 3 other countries. So in introduction, so we're focusing on Mathare, which is the second largest informal settlement in Kenya. It is home to over 500,000 people. We have a further focus on one of the villages within Mathare. Mathare is broken up into 11 villages called Malango Kubwa, which was one of the oldest villages established sometime in the mid-1900s. The COVID-19 youth-led response actually came from community itself, from youth groups we work with, specifically Mathare Environmental Conservation Youth Group, which runs our one-stop youth resource center, of which we have 9 across East Africa and now into Turkey. It was started in March 2020 when they approached us saying that the community was extremely concerned, concerned about where they were going, what was happening. The community felt completely helpless on what to do. So we began a consultation with them and with community members to find out what was the best option to work on. At the time, hand washing was seen as, one of the most effective and efficient ways to go about preventing COVID-19. So we started setting up hand washing stations first within this community, and then it expanded across across Kenya, and then into Somalia, and into Uganda, and then Ecuador. What we see this as, the focus of this, or what the aim of this presentation and the aim of this research report that we've done really shows how youth organizations and also community organizations have an ability to react quickly to public health issues and such, and the real strong need to bring about and to focus on youth and youth organizations as a way of an emergency public health response. We also think this is a participatory response because in engaging the youth groups and engaging what they had identified as a community issue, not only did it address the best knowledge we had about how to prevent COVID-19, but it as well addressed the issues and the concerns of the community done by the community. So it was very much it empowered the community to feel like they could take control when they were hearing about this pandemic that no one had control over. So we really think that this is an effective response. Especially when we're looking at the numbers that are in the informal settlements, which is set in demographics in the informal settlements, but we're looking at 70% of the population under the age of 30. So if we're not going to engage this population, we're missing a huge asset. And so this demonstrated well that can be the case. So what we did was work with them and collected data by both reviewing the documentation, but as well, we did interviews, we followed these groups, and we're still following these groups. So it started in March of 2020. It is now still ongoing, and we're into the 3rd, if not 4th wave. We no longer, of course, are focusing on solely on the hand washing, as hand washing has been proven not to be the major issue. So having said that, hand washing goes beyond just the needs for around COVID. It has now become an ingrained part of many young people, many children's way of life. I mean, so it is probably one of the largest wash programs ever run, where we trained young people how to wash their hands and such. But we also moved through many different forms of what we can do. We moved in mass. So in terms of the hand washing itself, we were able to, by the end of August of the International Youth Day in August of 2021, we were able to wash over 2.5 million pairs of hands within Kenya and these other countries. So that's a huge number. We had 94 at the peak. We had 94 stations running. Currently, we have around 40. These stations were run by youth groups. It also acted as a livelihood component because the youth groups were paid to run the stations. And so we really, and if you look at the statistics, especially in this one area, Malango Kubwa and Mathari, there's some of the lowest infection rates within Kenya. And we really believe, though we can't draw this exactly causally, we can see that that there is definitely a drop in the infection rates. I'm going to pass this over now to Olga, who is going to do just a quick presentation on our methodologies and such. Olga, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Doug. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you today. My name is Olga Tsaplina. I'm from Human Rights Social Inclusion Union of UN Habitat, and I'll be providing some insights about the data we based our research on and some of the main findings. And then Amandine will take over to discuss the points for discussion and conclusions arising from this study. So when it comes to the data, we relied upon to achieve the main objectives of the research, which are to identify the lessons learned and highlight the challenges and opportunities of engaging youth in providing a public health response and broader engaging them in planning, decision-making, and project implementation. We gathered the data from the existing research based on, as you can see, secondary data analysis, as well as we based our analysis on the internally conducted UN Habitat surveys, one-time series survey in Mathare, and also Youth Wellbeing Global Survey, as well as we interviewed community leaders and international organizations practitioners to get the insights. So as a normative framework for our paper, we chose UN Habitat COVID-19 response plan as the document that encourage practitioners to engage with young communities in broader COVID-19 response. So based on the literature review, we identified several priority areas which are essential for successful intervention. First of all, sustaining hygiene practices in the community as a way of combating the spread of virus. Secondly, educating the public on correct knowledge on infection control and self-help. Third, increasing youth livelihood and improve the resilience of the local community. And last but not least, advancing and protecting human rights. Each geographical and socio-economic context, of course, is unique, but effective prevention requires working along these lines. So evidence suggests that community-led responses supported but not orchestrated by external actors demonstrate better effectiveness than anything else. And learning from the past epidemic situations, as it has already been mentioned by the previous speaker, around 90% of African countries experience epidemic situations. Effectively supporting community-led response in vulnerable settings is instrumental for curbing the spread of disease. And normative and operational frameworks of the international organizations, as our secondary data analysis showed, are based on these findings. Secondly, however, the data emerging from the interviews with local youth leaders demonstrate that effective multi-stakeholder partnership is essential prerequisite of a successful community-led response. The thing about the multi-stakeholder partnership, as our young leaders told us, was in complementary capacities that have to be.
2 minutes left.
Yes, we can go forward.
Okay.
Yes. The last but not least, youth groups in informal settlements have proved a real substantive potential for mobilization that need to be encouraged. For example, the Mathare Environmental Conservation Youth Group, the main stakeholder we've been working with, through a strategy of resource mobilization and partnership building, have been able to engage with key agencies and utilizing the resources that are provided by these agencies to formulate a viable youth-led COVID-19 response that empowered the community and provoked spillover effect on the community, inspired them to follow the pattern. So now I'm handing mic over to Amandine, who will introduce the discussion points. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Helga. So our first conclusion point is about the importance of identifying and utilizing space. So what we observe is that hand washing stations in Matare, when they are placed in strategic locations in the neighborhood, they serve as public spaces for the community, so providing essential services. Those micro spaces are managed by young people, so it means that they are creating job opportunities for them, and they are also providing the population with information about the management of the health crisis. Likewise, the existence of platform for young people in informal settlements as the one-stop youth center is essential for capturing resources and incubating youth-led development projects. We also came to the conclusion that sustainable and resilient recovery requires acknowledging increased agency of youth. So yeah, while nowadays like responses are being transitioned to the measures of recovery, youth needs to be among both beneficiaries and agencies of this recovery process. And this is all the more crucial in informal settlements, as youth-led and community-driven organizations have often taken over the provision of services considered to be the domain of local authorities, such as waste collection and management of public spaces. So finally, the youth-led COVID-19 response in Matare allows us to acknowledge that youth plays an essential part in norm internalization across their communities. So particularly in their role as digital natives. Youth, as they are seen as part of a community and not outsiders, they step in as norm entrepreneurs, and they set a pattern for the rest of the community to follow. So in the context of our project, this was the case in setting the hand washing stations and also spreading the awareness via the murals. So thank you for listening, and yeah, we will be happy to open the discussion and exchange with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for Doc and your team. And we finished 3 presentations, and we will move to the discussion panel. Shaila, are you?
Yes, I'm
Hi.
around. Sorry, I just had to turn off my video because I'm having intermittent internet connection. So I'd like to thank everybody for the excellent presentations. I think we now have to move to, I think we have 15 minutes left, about 20. Move to post questions from anybody from the participants here. Would you like to ask questions? You can ask directly. If you can, I think there's a raise your hand button somewhere here, and you can do so. I'll call out your name. And also, if you'd like to post your questions on the chat box, we will get to those as well. So does anybody have any questions for the presenters today? Yes, no? Anybody?
Sorry, I've been struggling with finding every hand button. Okay, sorry, I will just try to switch it.
Okay, Miriam, please go ahead and ask your questions. Take it away.
Yes, thank you. Hello. I apologize in advance in case my connection is poor. Just let me know if you can't hear me. So I wanted to ask the last group of presenters from UN Habitat, how do you, thank you for your presentation, it's fascinating and very interesting to us and to me because we're obviously also very community involved in the slums here in Angola. How do you include the youth in a larger deliberations with the community, especially when it comes to, let's say, I don't know, municipal meetings or other kind of scaling up the deliberations. Because a problem we faced here is that the youth, when working on their own, do not necessarily find as many challenges, but it's when we bring them to the multi-stakeholder environment that their voice is kind of sometimes disregarded by the older people or the municipal representatives, administration, etc. So I would like to see if you encounter this problem, and if so, how you deal with it. And the second question, you have mentioned, and I think it's right, that they're digital natives, the youth and young adults. We've also had a challenge with combating fake news and misinformation in the communities that a lot of times spread through, obviously, social media, not only, but especially among the youth. So I don't know if you have any experience with that within your research and within the COVID-19 awareness and prevention. I'd like to hear your experience. Thank you.
Hi, Shaila. Thank you so much for those questions. So first off, oftentimes when we talk about youth participation and youth engagement, we often think it's the youth that need to be trained, but actually it's the adults. Because oftentimes they have biases, they do not engage young people, they do not give them a seat at the table, they do not give them any credit for the knowledge that they have, which, to be clear, is sometimes very localized just because of the function. Young people haven't been on this planet very long, so they may have less broader knowledge. But in general, they have a lot of localized knowledge and sometimes broader knowledge as well. So we often have to work a lot with local governments and other to really allow them that space. So we spend as much time sometimes with them as we do with the young people themselves. The second is that we really look to find how to present young people as experts and knowledge. And so that requires sometimes working with them. We do a lot of stuff when, maybe this kind of answers your digital native side, but we've done a lot of work using GIS and mapping, because that allows young people and community members in general to speak the language of planners. So suddenly they're speaking a digital language that come with a map, which is fully filled in. When we're looking at informal settlements, just by its name and formality, informal, there's not much knowledge on those settlements. There's not much formal knowledge. So what happens is that we work with young people and they're able to create that knowledge and put it in a way that planners can't ignore it. So that's another way. So yeah, those are two ways, and I don't want to take up the whole time. I don't think we have a lot of time left, but I'm not sure if Amandine or Olga have anything else to add, but those would be my 2 points.
Thank you very much for that, Doug. I think I saw a hand by, I think, Olga. Did you have your hands raised earlier?
Yes, thank you. I just had a question to the first speaker. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. Just wanted to know, since you've been talking about the governmentally led response to COVID-19, do you happen to know, was there any instance how government was engaging with young people, young communities for this COVID-19 response? Because originally I'm from Russia, and I know that at the initial stages, at least the local governments used to call out for youth to help with reaching out to elderly people, and that was a big thing. So I just was curious, maybe something like this you are aware of in South Africa. Thank you.
Did anybody from Douglas's group want to? Oh, sorry. This are the presenters from the University of Johannesburg here? Did anybody want to come in and answer Olga's question? Sorry, I think was that directed to Doug's group, right?
No, I am from Doug's group. So
okay. So I think okay. I couldn't hear properly. I had some internet connection issues. So is anybody here from the University of Johannesburg to answer the question? No, I guess not. Olga, do you mind if maybe you would like to sort of write down your answers and we can pass your questions and we can pass it on to the group that presented on the South African government and its preparedness in response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure, no worries.
Perfect. So is there any other questions from anybody else to our presenters? No, I guess I will be asking a question then. So I've got a quick question too, just to Doug's group. What do you think are the challenges to support the action of youth-led groups to address the COVID-19 challenges? Are there any, was it just COVID-19? Does this complement other types of, are they also active in other types of disasters, just like the COVID-19? Like, for example, climate change, for example. Have you seen any of that on the ground when you conducted your research?
Maybe I'll let Amandine answer that, as she's heading up the climate change program.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Amandine?
Amandine, are you around?
Yes.
We kind of put you on the spot, didn't we?
Yes, so we are also working on a climate change programs, but actually it's a global program that is spread like all over the world. We are conducting a survey in Latin America at the moment. So I'm not sure that it's really linked with Matari's leaders, but they are of course participating in our program, and we are working with them on a climate change and recycling project. But I think Mary has her hands up, so she's working on this project and maybe she wants to precise it.
Great. Mary, do you want to come in? Mary? I think you're on mute.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello.
We can hear you. Anyways, maybe Mary's having some problems. Well, if Mary jumps in, we'll jump. But let me just say that in terms of young people in crisis, we've dealt with many. As Amandine says, we have a global program of young people working on climate change. I mean, if you follow any of the news and stuff around Greta Thunberg, you might think that it's all run by Swedes or people in the developed world, but actually we find it's people in the developing world that are in responding this. We have a woman named Leah Namugerwa in Uganda who did massive COVID-19 response as well as climate change response. So yes, the challenges they often face, obviously resourcing is a huge issue. I mean, young people we're working with in Mathari are making maybe $5 a day, and oftentimes they have young families. They live in rooms that are very small. They have many, not one job, but many jobs to try to make ends meet. So that capacity is that. But the other is, I think, the common across all young people globally is the ability to engage in governance systems. And actually, this kind of comes back to your first question: is how do they knowledge about that? Like, how do they understand what government's happening? How do they understand what local government, what they need to do? But then as well, just the barriers put up in governance in general. So I think they look for different mechanisms. I think we assist in that, in identifying the mechanisms and then creating the mechanisms. Oftentimes, these groups are civil society groups, and in any country, developing or developed, civil society has different strengths, and the governments allow civil society to be really engaged or not. So it's their organizing that I think is sometimes the weakness, but then again, when they get it right, is the strength, and the collective action of young people is quite impressive at times. So yeah, hopefully that answers the questions.
Absolutely. Olga, I see that you have your hands raised. Do you want to come in?
Yes, just a small little addition. I just wanted to add that what exactly was it on the ground, the COVID-19 response? It was 34 youth-led groups that have been united under some sort of like leading organization, which in Matare was Matare Environmental Conservation Youth Group, and also in Kibera, that was another group. And these organizations are all not only based on this health crisis response issue. Some of them were groups of local artists, some of them were groups of environmental activists. So it's coming back to your questions about youth groups being able to respond to pending crisis and challenges. So they were all just united by the fact that they are really concerned about their community and about the whole situation, and they are still having their own focus. So yes, they are. I guess there are a lot of environmental groups, environmental activists, which are not talking only about even waste management, but also about the planet conservation. So I hope it would be like a small addition that could help.
Sure. And a quick question as well. Oh, hi, Yangfan. Do you want to come in?
Yes, I have a question for Mariam.
Yes.
In your conclusion and the recommendation, you mentioned capacity building and stressing resilience. Would you like to give some detailed information about how to strengthen the resilience?
Yes, thank you for the question. So I briefly mentioned some of the initiatives that we have done in this past year. There have been different ones since we started working with the community several years ago. But this year specifically, an innovation has been focusing, well, first on education and public health, so that local groups can go out and actually give trusted information to the community, because we found that it's always better accepted and better understood when spread by locals, and in particular cases in native languages, etc. So one was in terms of education, educating the groups or training the groups, and then sending them out. Another more practical way was through creating workshops for seamsters, for masks specifically. There were some groups that were also doing hazmat, sort of an improvised hazmat suits, or at least covering for nurses and doctors operating in the neighborhoods where really bioprotection material is very, very rare. We also had soap making workshops for especially women from the neighborhood, recycling used oil. So these are some initiatives that could also lead to financial independence, at least in the medium run or short run, as related to the pandemic, but could also be then expanded hopefully later on. So these are just some examples.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have room for one more question. And I see here on the chat box that there's a question for Douglas and his team from Hamid. His question is, have you noticed that the government has put in place economic measures to engage young people in local governance through economic empowerment? For example, promoting the informal innovation to create local solutions to reduce the economic effects of COVID-19.
Yes, there's a program here called Kazi Matani, which has been focused on getting young people engaged, and specifically looking at young people upgrading sewer systems, water systems, distributing PPP, the protective masks and such. So they definitely have used the opportunity to bring young people on and have them engaged in helping. And I think we've seen that a lot in not just Kenya, but across the world, where we've seen young people engaged in frontline COVID-19 response. So I think it's now, and also, but to note also that they've also been, though young people are less likely to, or have been for at least the first wave, less likely to get COVID, they also are impacted significantly by lack of it. They're not being able to educate, even though we have lots of young people who've got online, a lot of young people can't access that. So we're looking at, UNICEF has said over 300 million young people have were not able to access education at all. Unemployment among young people generally during COVID has also been incredibly high. So it's been really important for the governments to do that. I know many have, and Kenya definitely is taking the lead, at least here, in this region, in making sure that young people keep their jobs.
Thanks very much, Doug. I think it's now, we have to close the session now. And I'd like to thank everybody for the very engaging discussion and your participation. I think it's been such a great discussion today, and we've learned a lot from the participants. May I ask that if you can, we'd like to take a group photo, and we would like to take a picture, group picture, if it's possible.
Yes, please.
Sure, no problem.
Open your video if you can. Thank you so much. Smile, please. Yeah, very beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice
Thank you
to
so
meet
much.
you. Thank
Nice
you
to
for
meet you
your
all.
contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Shaila.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Tonton, it's finished.
It's finished?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tonton.
All right, so thank you for this panel,
good.
and
It's good presentation and a discussion.
yes, okay, I appreciate it. Okay, so I'll see you on the next panel session then. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
So is this the room for climate change? It's supposed to start happening now?
Oui, hello. Hi. So actually, I think you're in the next panel. That's at 11:30. So that will be another link. It's the same room.
Okay. Yeah, I'm moderating, I think. I thought I just saw it on the...
Yes, you're the panel chair with the Tonton. Yes.
So it's this room, but when? What time?
It's at 11:30.
Okay. So I'm just trying to convert to...
So in 25 minutes.
In 25 minutes.
Yes.
Excellent.
I'll just make sure
Thank you.
it's really the same room, or if it's another link. Just give me a second.
Okay.
Hi everyone. So it's 11:30. So Douglas, if you want, you can start.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Climate Change and COVID-19 workshop. I think we're just going to give it a couple more minutes to see if some people can come on, and then we'll start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Climate Change and COVID-19 workshop. I think we can start now. So hope everyone's doing well. We have a number of amazing speakers that are going to be here, so looking forward to hearing from them. As everyone knows, and I do apologize, I'm probably going to have to turn my video off because my connection is quite weak. My name is Doug Reagan. I'm with UN Habitat. I'm calling from Nairobi, Kenya. And we have, like I say, we have a range of really excellent speakers that you can see on the list here. I think the first speaker we're going to have is Leila Marie, University of Zor in Morocco. And I believe that we are going to have her by video, or pre-recorded. So if we can have that put up first, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I am there was no sound, so I'll just restart that.
Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde. Je commence par me présenter. Je suis Leila Amraoui, enseignant-chercheur en géographie, spécialité climatologie, à l'université Ibn Zor qui se trouve à Aït Melloul, près d'Agadir au Maroc. Je présente un sujet de synthèse qui est intitulé Urbanisation et climat et le rôle de l'arbre dans la modulation du climat urbain. En effet, dans un contexte de changements globaux, l'urbanisation, surtout dans son mode accéléré, de par l'artificialisation qu'elle fait subir au milieu, est à l'origine de la création d'un climat spécifique aux villes, le climat urbain. Ce climat urbain, en fait, n'est pas un phénomène nouveau puisque l'on peut retrouver sa trace dans la littérature scientifique depuis la fin du XIXe siècle. Toutefois, ces aspects peuvent être parfois exacerbés par le changement. Mais tout d'abord, qu'est-ce que le climat urbain? En climatologie, les phénomènes sont analysés selon plusieurs échelles spatiales. Au sommet, nous avons le macroclimat, dont dépendent des phénomènes atmosphériques qui couvrent plusieurs millions à plusieurs dizaines de millions de kilomètres carrés. Et puis, tout en bas de la pyramide, nous avons le microclimat, qui est l'échelle spatiale la plus fine et qui concerne des espaces de quelques centimètres à quelques dizaines de mètres. Et au fait, le climat urbain est la synthèse d'une variété de microclimats. Sa spécificité réside dans le fait qu'il est influencé par les différentes composantes du paysage urbain. Donc tout ce qui est rugosité du sol, les ombres portées, la végétation, les masques architecturaux, etc. Et ces composantes, dans leur interférence avec les paramètres météorologiques, tels que l'ensoleillement, les mouvements de l'air, la température, l'humidité, sont à l'origine de modifications qui affectent les bilans radiatifs, convectifs, thermiques et évaporatifs. Ces modifications vont toucher aussi la circulation des... Et en fait, ces interférences entre le paysage urbain et les paramètres météorologiques modifient les caractéristiques de la basse troposphère au niveau de la canopée urbaine et de la couche limite urbaine qui sont en contact direct avec la surface urbanisée. Et on peut observer par exemple sur cette figure que la couche limite urbaine est plus haute que la couche limite rurale, mais ce n'est pas la seule spécificité de la ville. Donc ce n'est pas la seule spécificité de la ville sur le plan climatique, puisque le climat urbain se distingue par un écoulement de l'air spécifique, donc des modifications qui concernent le vent local, par un bilan hydrique spécifique, et surtout par un bilan radiatif et donc thermique qui est spécifique aux espaces urbanisés. Je ne vais pas m'attarder sur le vent, mais il est important de souligner le fait que le vent est généralement plus faible dans la ville, car les composantes de la ville représentent en fait des obstacles face à la circulation du vent. Donc, en fonction de la forme, de la hauteur, de la disposition du bâti, il y a des impacts sur le vent local en termes de vitesse du vent et en termes de direction. Pour ce qui est du bilan hydrique, les effets se résument dans deux aspects. Tout d'abord, il y a une modification de l'évapotranspiration. Donc, cette modification de l'évapotranspiration est liée à une diminution de la présence de végétaux par rapport aux milieux ruraux et elle est liée aussi à l'imperméabilisation du sol. Et donc, cette diminution des phénomènes d'évapotranspiration explique l'humidité relative inférieure en zone urbaine. Le deuxième aspect, en ce qui concerne le bilan hydrique, il est relatif au développement des infrastructures, donc tout ce qui est réseau d'adduction et d'assainissement, les déversoirs d'orage, l'imperméabilisation du sol, et donc le remplacement des réseaux naturels par des réseaux artificiels. Tout ça a considérablement accru les vitesses d'écoulement et diminué les temps de concentration, ce qui donne de forts débuts de pointe associés aux événements pluvieux plus ou moins importants. Pour ce qui est du bilan radiatif, qui constitue la spécificité majeure du climat urbain, sa manifestation principale est le phénomène des îlots de chaleur urbains, qui est un phénomène qui renvoie à la différence de température de surface et de l'air entre les centres urbanisés et l'espace non urbanisé voisin. Comme l'on peut observer sur cette figure, nous avons une amplitude thermique de 4 degrés Celsius en moyenne entre le centre-ville, donc au centre qui est représenté par le pic au milieu de la figure, et l'espace rural voisin. Les températures sont très influencées donc par la nature de la surface, surtout par la présence de la végétation et les surfaces aquatiques. Des études ont été menées sur ce sujet, par exemple celle qui a considéré le cas de Marrakech au Maroc. Nous avons donc un extrait de cette étude avec ces deux graphiques qui représentent les courbes moyennes thermiques de la surface pendant la saison d'été à droite et puis pendant la saison du printemps à gauche. On peut observer que la température varie en fonction des saisons, donc c'est pendant l'amplitude thermique varie en fonction des saisons. Elle est plus élevée pendant l'été, donc plus il fait chaud, plus cette amplitude thermique entre la surface urbanisée et des surfaces végétalisées est importante. On peut observer également que la courbe elle est plus gonflée quand il s'agit de surfaces urbanisées, alors qu'elle l'est moins quand il s'agit de surfaces qui sont couvertes de végétation, que ce soit des terres agricoles ou de la pelouse ou des arbres persistants. L'effet de l'îlot de chaleur urbain est aggravé également par les périodes de grande chaleur ou caniculaires. On peut observer ici, donc pour l'exemple de l'Île-de-France, que l'amplitude thermique est de 4 degrés Celsius entre le centre et le milieu rural pour un été considéré comme étant normal, qui est celui de 2008, donc à droite. Tandis que l'été 2003, qui avait enregistré une canicule inhabituelle, cette amplitude est de 8 degrés Celsius entre le centre et les environs de l'Île-de-France. Mais alors, comment peut-on expliquer ce phénomène? D'abord, il y a l'effet de l'albédo qui est différent en fonction de la couleur, de la nature de la surface et en fonction du matériau utilisé. Ainsi, des constructions repeintes en blanc, par exemple, vont réfléchir plus d'énergie que d'autres constructions ou d'autres surfaces plus sombres. Plus une surface absorbe l'énergie incidente et donc est dotée d'un faible albédo, plus sa contribution au réchauffement nocturne surtout va être importante par effet de restitution de la chaleur pendant la nuit. En plus de l'albédo, il y a les apports anthropiques de chaleur qui se résument dans les rejets de chaleur d'origine anthropique comme le chauffage, le transport, activité industrielle et également le métabolisme humain qui sont donc beaucoup plus importants en milieu urbain du fait de la concentration des activités et des habitations. On peut observer sur cette carte qui représente la distribution des rejets de chaleur d'origine anthropique en Europe. Et on peut observer tout simplement que ce sont les grandes métropoles européennes qui concentrent les rejets de chaleur d'origine anthropique les plus intenses et les plus importants. En plus donc de l'effet de l'albédo et les apports de chaleur anthropique, nous avons aussi le facteur du manque ou de l'absence de la végétation en milieu urbain, car la végétation, par le biais de l'évapotranspiration, par l'effet d'ombrage, contribue au rafraîchissement des températures. Maintenant que le constat est fait, quelles solutions peut-on proposer à ces transformations qui affectent surtout le bilan hydrique et thermique de la ville? Bien évidemment, plusieurs solutions écosystémiques sont proposées par la communauté scientifique, comme les surfaces aquatiques pour les températures et l'alimentation de l'air en vapeur d'eau. Il y a la solution qui consiste à jouer sur l'effet de l'albédo dans les constructions et les infrastructures dans les espaces urbains. En revanche, la solution la plus efficiente, et ce à plusieurs titres, pour pallier les problèmes au niveau du bilan hydrique et thermique et la végétation. Donc par le biais du verdissement des villes et la création ou la reconstitution des forêts urbaines. Nous pouvons observer ici l'exemple de l'Île-de-France où Météo France avait mené une étude qui propose donc la végétation, l'introduction de la végétation comme solution de lutte contre les effets de chaleur, les îlots de chaleur urbains. Et on peut observer sur la figure en haut qui décrit un scénario vert, ce qui peut se passer dans le cas de l'introduction de plus de végétation. Donc on peut observer que l'amplitude thermique est moins importante entre le centre et les environs, alors que le scénario passif nous renseigne sur un îlot de chaleur urbain plus important. On voit que la tache rouge qui représente la température, elle est plus étendue et plus importante. Mais comment donc la végétation contribue à l'amélioration du climat urbain? D'abord, pour les îlots de chaleur urbains, l'effet de l'albédo qui varie entre 15 et 20% pour les arbres, donc par l'effet aussi de l'ombrage, parce qu'il n'y a que 20% du rayonnement incident qui atteint la surface en cas de présence des arbres. Aussi par le biais de l'évapotranspiration, puisque l'arbre rejette de la vapeur d'eau dans l'air, ce qui contribue au refroidissement de l'air. Pour le cycle hydrique, en revanche, les arbres contribuent à la fixation du sol grâce à leur système racinaire, à rendre le sol moins imperméable et donc diminue par conséquent le risque des inondations. Nous nous intéressons à ce sujet parce qu'au moment où le Maroc réalise beaucoup d'avancées en matière de lutte contre les impacts du changement climatique, la problématique du climat urbain n'est pas vraiment prise en considération. Par exemple, le ratio végétal minimum fixé par l'OMS à 10 mètres carrés par habitant n'est pas respecté du tout au Maroc. Plus de 600 hectares de forêts périurbaines disparaissent irréversiblement tous les ans sous la pression urbaine. Aussi, la ville de Casablanca consacre moins d'1 mètre carré d'espace vert par habitant. Et selon les services de l'urbanisme, des études ont démontré que 65% des villes marocaines représentent des ratios inférieurs à 1 mètre carré d'espace vert par habitant, alors que la norme internationale préconisée par l'OMS, comme on vient de l'évoquer, est fixée à 10 mètres carrés par habitant. Le Maroc s'est lancé depuis 2016 dans l'élaboration des PTRC, les plans territoriaux de lutte contre les effets du réchauffement climatique. Et dans le premier, parmi ces plans territoriaux, a été réalisé dans la région Souss-Massa, d'où je vous parle. Agadir se trouve dans la région Souss-Massa. Donc ces plans qui pourtant se veulent inclusifs et tiennent compte aussi bien des mesures d'adaptation que d'atténuation des émissions de gaz à effet de serre ne formulent malheureusement pas de mesures destinées spécifiquement aux risques que représente l'urbanisation sur le climat. Et donc, au moment où les pays occidentaux ont bien avancé en matière d'aménagement urbain résilient en termes climatiques, au Maroc, à l'image des pays africains, nous sommes à peine au stade de formulation de constats. En même temps, le rythme de l'urbanisation s'accélère sans cesse. Et en ce sens, notre laboratoire de recherche donc, inscrit ces thématiques de climatologie urbaine dans ses axes de recherche. Nous avons également créé une association pour promouvoir le verdissement des villes. Je vous remercie infiniment pour votre attention. Merci.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation on climate change. If we can put up the next agenda for the next person, the next speaker, please.
We'll share the agenda. Just a second.
Thanks. Great. Very much. So the next speaker is Ambiola. She's from Yaba College of Technology in Nigeria. Ambiola, please go ahead.
Good afternoon from this side of the country, from this side of the world. It's a pity that the pre-recording stuff that I sent was not received. I'm so sorry about that, but I have the PowerPoint stuff here to guide me in the presentation. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you. You can also share your presentation. Yes, we can hear you. You can share your presentation if you'd like as well.
I will stop sharing so you can share, okay?
Okay.
Do you know how to share?
Yeah, I have the PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so. Can you see it?
The PowerPoint, no. You have to push no. You have to push the share screen button on the bottom.
Share screen. Please, can you?
In Zoom, you should have a share screen button across the bottom, and then you do.
Okay.
You click on that, and then you click on your. Then you click on your presentation, and you should be able to. That would share it.
Please, can you go on with the next while I try to manage it, please?
Okay. Sure thing. Can you put up the speakers again? Thanks. Okay, as we wait for Ambiola to figure out the tech issue, can
Mure-Ravaud from my alma mater, Xiamen University. Can you do your presentation?
Sure, yeah. Hi, Douglas. I can. Hi. Yes, I can. So if you want to, let me just share my screen then. Just a minute. Here we go. Okay, I assume everybody can see that.
Yeah, we can. Excellent, thanks.
Okay, just give me a second here sorry about this. Okay. Okay, and everyone can hear me audio-wise?
Excellent.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone, for listening to my conference presentation. I am Xiamen, or Cam for short, a television news producer in Canada, and a senior PhD candidate examining different models and approaches to journalism in order to better engage audiences on climate change. Because this is a Canada, China, Africa presentation, let me introduce myself in the other languages. 感谢大家收听我的会议演讲，我是 Mure-Ravaud 加拿大环球电视台的新闻制作人与 SFU 大学的博士学生。我的研究是有关使用不同的新闻模式和方法，以更好的吸引观众来关注和了解气候危机。Merci d'avoir assisté à ma présentation à la conférence de Icccasu. Je suis Mure-Ravaud, réalisateur de nouvelles avec la chaîne de Global News et un candidat doctoral à l'université Simon Fraser à Vancouver. J'examine les différents modèles et approches du journalisme afin de mieux engager le public sur le changement climatique. At this conference, we've been talking a lot about how cities can adapt and change in order to deal with the growing emergency of global heating. And sorry, I'm just going to take some water here. And there are great examples of cities leading the ways in ways big and small. So just to give you some examples from where I live, in the city of Burnaby, which is a suburban community next to Vancouver, British Columbia, Burnaby is one of the first cities in Canada to require all new buildings to have electric vehicle hookups. It passed policy mandating that every new development and street in the city have dedicated bike lanes moving forward. And it has designated 4 nodes or town centers in the city as development clusters for transit-oriented commercial and residential development as a way of increasing density and reducing reliance on the car. Now, these are just some small examples from one small city. This conference has discussed many other examples all over the world, and I'm sure there are great examples from where you live. Now, cities matter, and to explain why they matter, I would like to describe my work. It focuses on the role of solutions in engaging the public on the climate emergency. Now, the climate emergency is real, obviously. It is here, and it's only going to get worse. So we need to adapt and take action. And yet, despite its seriousness, the climate crisis does not dominate the headlines and capture people's imagination the way other issues like COVID-19 do. In 2019, a year that saw a lot of coverage around climate change, this issue still just made up less than 1% of all news coverage. And in 2020, it was even worse. So why is climate change such a challenging issue to wrap our heads around? Why, despite the real and growing danger that it presents, do we talk about it so little? Why is there so little news coverage of climate change? Well, there are many reasons, but here are a few. First of all, climate change is an extremely tricky subject to wrap our heads around. There is no one single cause. There is no one single solution. It feels abstract, just like a Jackson Pollock painting. Second, the immediate causes of climate change are invisible. You literally cannot see the CO2 that is slowly heating up our planet and warming it up like a greenhouse. If CO2 looked like the smog that used to cover the city of Los Angeles in the 1990s, or if CO2 were red or smelled like rotten eggs, the world would have acted upon it decades ago. But carbon dioxide is invisible and intangible, and that makes getting people to worry about it very difficult. And third, climate change is complicated. It feels too big, too scary, and it feels like it is too difficult for one person to fix. How am I, as one person, supposed to deal with the receding glaciers, melting ice caps, and rising seas? So what explains this disconnect? Ironically, it has a lot to do with information. The conventional approach to communicating information about climate change, and indeed about other risks, is known as the information deficit model, Here's an ad that was recently posted in a friend's condominium building that uses the information deficit model to encourage residents to recycle. This model presumes that providing people with more information will lead them to form rational decisions, and by extension, engage in behaviors that build upon those rational decisions. Want to get people to recycle? Just give them the stats. Or if you want to get people to stop smoking, or so the logic goes, just tell them that smoking causes cancer. Countless UN reports, including this IPCC report, try to explain the urgency of the climate emergency through complex charts and graphics. Similarly, most news media reports about climate change rely upon the information deficit model. Give people the information about all the bad things that will happen to jolt them into action. Well, guess what? It hasn't worked. Now, this is not to say that information does not matter. Information about climate change clearly is important given the lack of knowledge among some population groups about the causes, consequences, and solutions for addressing the climate crisis. In the United States, just 57% of the American public agrees that global warming is caused by human activities. 57%, that is shockingly low. And just 55%, again, really low, know that there is a scientific consensus around climate change. But the point I want to make here is that information is just one piece of the puzzle. Information unto itself is not always enough. So we have to connect messages of climate change to the values, attitudes, beliefs, and social norms that people already have and that they can relate to. This approach has been described as the cultural cognition thesis, or CCT. Now, CCT groups people into two camps: those who are hierarchical individualistic and those that are egalitarian communitarian. So individualists, as the name suggests, believe more strongly in social rankings, status, and hierarchy. Egalitarians, conversely, are more drawn to mutual goals and common values and shared interests, the greater good over the individual good. These individuals, the egalitarians, are much more likely to espouse attitudes and beliefs that are in line with protecting the natural world. But which values, or which rationalities, if I can call it that, does our news media and information ecosystem and our society emphasize, validate, and constantly celebrate? The former, the idea of individualism, hierarchy, status, ranking, linked to commercial culture, consumption as freedom. On a daily basis, we are bombarded with information and ads that normalize, celebrate, and glorify the idea of consumption, linking it to personal freedom, happiness, and liberty. Our news media emphasize the importance of economic growth. Consumption is important for economic growth, we are told. And then there's social media, which is full of images that celebrate and glorify consumption as tantamount to the good life. Now, I'm not a downer. I too like to travel, but we are showered with these signals in a highly consumption-driven society. Just think for a moment what the world would look like if the notions of collective and community and shared values were emphasized constantly in our news media, in our information ecosystem, and indeed on social media. What kind of a world would that be? Instead of posting on Instagram about the latest exotic vacation or infinity pool, we might be compelled to advertise how we are cleaning up a beach, or living at one with the earth, or how we are working together collectively to strengthen our community. But those frames of the collective, the shared values, the common goals, and the mutual interests are conspicuously absent in a lot of our day-to-day communication. In short, we don't talk enough about climate change and about pro-environmental actions and behaviors. Thus, simply strengthening those frames of egalitarianism and communitarianism, of self-transcendence, not self-enhancement, in our daily news media diet can help develop more pro-environmental attitudes and beliefs. We need to speak to people through their values. But here's the other thing. We also need more examples of what is working, who is leading the way, and who is getting it right. People learn from examples by seeing others like them do things that are normal, ordinary, and desirable. And this is where cities play such an important role. Cities are acting in ways that national or even provincial or state governments are not. They are leading the way. Stories of success from people or communities that we can relate to, whose values we can understand, are some of the most effective, important, and yet underutilized forms of communication. Moral injunctions that tell you to do something because that behavior, to tell you not to do something because that behavior is bad, or that make you feel guilty in order to drive behavioral change, rarely work, but we use them all the time in our communication. We're told not to litter because littering pollutes the planet, or not to feed the ducks because it kills them, but people still feed the ducks. Instead, what is far more effective than injunctions calling on you to do or not do something is information that other people like you are engaging in a given behavior. This is what is known as descriptive social norms. Descriptions of normal and desirable social behavior that other people like you are already engaging in. Communication about what others like you are already doing and that is normal, ordinary, desirable, and even enjoyable can be a very powerful communicative tonic. So consider this simple yet effective ad from the UK. It does not tell you to not litter as most anti-litter campaigns do. Instead, it says, take your litter home because other people do that too. Which brings me to solutions. This is why we need more information, especially stories about climate solutions. We need stories about people who we can relate to, and stories about individuals, groups, cities, and even companies that are showing the way, and that we can understand on a local level? Who in our community is making a difference? Conversely, who is getting it right elsewhere, and how can we emulate them over here? Why do solutions matter? 3 reasons. First, solutions information, and especially visual examples of things that are working, build a sense of efficacy, that action mitigating the climate crisis is possible. Second, solutions create and reinforce a social norm that a given activity, be it recycling or designing a city to be bike friendly, is indeed normal, doable, enjoyable, and desirable. And third, solutions information helps mobilize those individuals who are already the most engaged with the climate crisis. You know, we spend a lot of time trying to understand what makes a person a climate change denier or disinterested in the climate crisis. But we often overlook the huge and growing population cohort that is already alarmed or concerned by this emergency. So solutions mobilize them. I just talked about the importance of solutions. Let me close by talking about the importance of stories. You know, in spite of all of the technology we have around us, cell phones, 5G, internet, social media, the most effective way of communicating to people is through firsthand stories, just like our ancestors did, sitting around the fire thousands of years ago. We need examples, especially visual examples of who is showing the way forward. This is the aspect that is missing in so much communication around climate change. And journalists who are experts in asking questions and investigating are uniquely positioned to take up the role of looking at not just what's broken, but what's working. This is called solutions journalism. In short, we have to talk more about climate change and tell stories about it, especially stories about solutions that are relatable, local, interesting, and yes, important. The challenge with climate change is not just that people are not aware of it or that they do not understand it. I would argue that the primary challenge with climate change is that we simply don't talk enough about it. It feels disconnected from our life, but it shouldn't. Climate change isn't about doom. It's about the way we live now, and we need to talk about that far more often. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much. That was a really interesting presentation, and I think it brings up lots of important issues on how we can move forward, both in the actions we need to take, but also how we communicate. So I think it's really important and brings up lots of new issues that we need to talk about, and I'm sure we'll talk about when we get to the questions. Can I have the agenda up again? Great. Thank you. So next up, a person who was in my last workshop and did an amazing job is Safaee. She's from the University of Ottawa, and she's doing a presentation on gender and climate change. Safaee, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So I'm just waiting to be able to share my screen. Okay, here it is. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to be I'm just going to start off with introducing myself. I'm not going to turn on my camera because I'm having serious internet issues, and the bell guy is actually supposed to come over, so I might be interrupted for 2 seconds. So my name is Lolita Shaila Safaee Chalkasra. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Ottawa, and I also work as an analyst at the Climate Finance Division of Global Affairs Canada. And so since I work in the area of international development aid, my primary interest is not just understanding climate vulnerability and impact, but rather of using an evidence-based research approach to inform policy and practice in international development cooperation. So this research presentation is actually from a research project that I did about 2 years ago while I was working as a researcher at Canada's International Development Research Center. And so my topic is about gender and climate change adaptation in the Philippines. As we all know, Canada has a policy called Feminist International Assistance policy that it's supposed to be integrated in all development aid projects. So research has shown that gender inequality can amplify the risks of climate change, including in climate-related and health disasters. So I included health now because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And like this, and in particular, worse in socioeconomic and environmentally vulnerable geographical locations. So I chose the Philippines as a case study, an area where I've done research and development work for the past 8 years. And I use a qualitative approach to examine the gender, climate change, and disaster risk reduction policies at the city and municipal level. So my research objectives is basically to understand environmental change that affects the lives of residents in targeted areas, which are vulnerable to environmental and climate change. And now, of course, these are usually urban, low-income communities, and most are informal settlements. So we know that it's high density, high population, and it's been very vulnerable to the COVID-19 as well. And I also aim to identify or investigate the gender dimensions of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction programs, focusing on 2 cities, urban cities, highly urbanized cities in the Philippines. And then the third is to identify barriers and opportunities in the uptake of gender-related approaches in climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction programs at the urban level. And so basically to understand how municipal governments can be mobilized towards a more gender transformative approach to programs to assist people in reducing their vulnerability and help them cope with climate change and disasters. So my study sites were, again, highly vulnerable. And one was a coastal city, which is Parañaque City, which is part of the city, Metro Manila. And Baguio City, which is a mountainous region in the Philippines. So they both have, particular disaster and climate profiles prone to climate variability, such as frequent typhoons, landslides, flooding. And I did a literature review first and focused on Philippine policy documents as part of my methodology. I also interviewed about 38 city government officials from 2 of the cities. They ranged from community, local level policymakers at the village level, at the city level, and also at the national level. And I also conducted a semi-structured interview with households, which composed of 52 male and female research participants that were aged 18 and over. And I held a group discussion with women's grassroots organizations. So there were 23 participants from women's grassroots organizations, particularly in the city of Parañaque, which is part of Manila. And Baguio, I had a in-depth interview with the president of the city's Women's Association. They were they're very instrumental and also very vocal on navigating and articulating the rights of low-income women in urban contexts. And so the findings, first is I looked at policies. And so what the finding was that integration of gender approach to climate change and adaptation and disaster risk reduction is often localized at the very local level. And as such, there is usually a disconnect between national and local to village level implementation. And so there's a strong mandate for gender mainstreaming in city development policies at the national and city levels, but these are usually very sectoral in approach and often lacks viewing, well, using an intersectional lens related to the differentiated needs of women and men within a community. And so the framing usually, the approach at the policy level, framing of socioeconomic and environmental vulnerabilities of women using a technocratic approach, and usually women-only programs, usually does not capture women's leadership abilities or recognize their potential to lead, and particularly be very sort of be a key linkage between vulnerable households, for example, and addressing their needs. And order power, also these technocratic approach women-only programs usually do not recognize the level of power in decision-making within the households and also in the communities. And so at the city level, policymakers who are in charge of implementing these gender-related programs often sometimes lack the expertise, particularly gender and climate and disaster expertise at the planning level, especially at the village level, like one of the villages that were examined in this research. So this meant that interventions that's supposed to cater to the needs of women may not be adequately addressed. And in terms of programs that support building women's agency, usually through the institutional programs, are really important to help them better cope and adapt to the socioeconomic, environmental, and climate-related stress. So the most vulnerable women interviewed within the community usually rely, especially in informal settlements, rely on institutional support and city government programs to cope with poverty and other environmental related challenges, including floods and natural disasters, and of course now the pandemic. So in the Philippines, households were found to be generally gender neutral when it comes to household decision making. Men and women make equal decisions in the family, depending who is earning a livelihood at a given time. Usually they work in the informal sector, and which is usually precarious, often seasonal, and that families usually rely on each other for their day-to-day survival. And even another finding was, even when there's an institutional family and social support, poverty and environmental stress have been found to be barriers and a burden to women, which affects their agency, their ability to sort of invest in themselves, their livelihood skills, invest in resources and their skills. So for example, women's workload can double while they are still the primary caregivers of their family members. Usually this is unpaid, they're unpaid laborers. And all of these things contribute to time poverty that affect the well-being and their ability to cope with environmental stress or health-related disasters. In terms of looking at the women's organizations, they were found to be very instrumental in negotiating and articulating their rights and needs, the rights of women within their communities, including brokering transformative change related to socio-cultural norms and behavioral change within their communities. However, their influence in formal decision-making processes, the way they navigate or interact with city officials who are the ones implementing programs at the institutional level, can usually be limited and dependent on strong lobbying among women's groups. So for example, women's leadership position within these grassroots organizations as well depend on their level of participation, their income level, and power politics within these organizations. So this has implications on their ability to lobby and negotiate for programs that are supposed to be tailored to their interests, even when they are part of women's grassroots groups. So in conclusion, basically, such communities are the most impacted. The ones that I did research on, a lot of them are really impacted by climate and environmental related stresses because they often have very limited resources to cope and they usually rely on city resources and targeted programs to improve their well-being and their livelihoods. So it's important to have very strong gender-related policies that is geared towards improving the agency of women and improve their capacity to adapt to environmental and climate-related challenges, especially in the recent wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And building the agency and capacity of women as well is a long iterative process. It's not a one solution that solves problems, and it's usually interdependent of other socioeconomic development objectives, not just really climate related, but a host of other challenges. And to truly have a transformative change in improving women's agencies, it's really necessary to address and improve the power relationships, the power dynamics within the households and communities. So programs targeted towards these usually take a long-term process to see outcomes, but quite necessary to engage women more in the process and also contribute to better development outcomes. And lastly, in terms of policy, the lack of linkage between the gender equality and empowerment programs, as well as climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction in city planning, usually they are taken as separate and not much interconnected or linked, should be revisited, and how should be added in national and local level policies, and the linkage between these is usually an impediment to long-term positive outcomes for long-term climate resiliency building in the face of climate and disasters challenges in the Philippines. And of course, now with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's sort of been added as a part of disaster preparedness. So before it was just more environmental, and now it's really important to sort of integrate and look at different kinds of risks in city planning, and to sort of look at this into the policy level, and also ensure that there's engagement, participatory engagement with rights organizations, and because these rights organizations are really important in brokering and addressing the needs and articulating the needs for low-income residents and informal settlements. So yeah, that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was great. That was really interesting. And I think oftentimes we forget the gender dynamic and the gender aspect of climate change. So that was really, really interesting. So I hope that for our last speaker, we're running a bit late, unfortunately, but is our last speaker able to present? Sorry, I'm trying to get the agenda back up again.
Hello. So I think we can start the discussion. So because this person here, I think he has some connection issue to join the Zoom meeting. So if you like, you can start the discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. So do we have any questions from anyone? We had some really interesting, I guess we focused mostly on climate change. I don't think there was any presentations per se on COVID, but any questions on gender, on communications regarding climate change?
Well, I have a question for Shaila.
Great. Sure.
Go ahead. By the way, I really enjoyed your presentation. I also really enjoyed Lila's presentation on urban trees. Sorry, I'm a journalist, so I always have questions. No, Shaila, I found your talk very fascinating. And I guess my question was, in your research, to what extent did you find that, status quo gender roles in the Philippines? I'm assuming that there's, it's a very male gendered society. I could be wrong, but I'm assuming it is that. And I'm wondering, to what extent did those entrenched male-centered views impede these households from engaging in climate action?
That's an absolutely perfect question. So the thing with the Philippines, what I find that it's kind of unique, first of all, in Asia, is that it's very strong on gender in terms of policies. And it's it's still kind of like there's male dominated, like it's a male dominated society, but kind of not too. It depends where you go. So that's why the intersectional sort of perspective is really important in examining these issues and challenges. In terms of male dominated, like for households, for example, I've had a lot of interviews with women's organizations, basically, where they come together and talk about the issues and in trying to address their needs. And I've also had interviews with households. In informal settlements, because where I did my research, usually there's not much of power dynamics in a way that it really depends. The household decision making depends on who is earning at a given time, because it's kind of very like the jobs that they have is usually very informal, and it's kind of like earning per day. So the male interviewees that I've talked to was more like, I'm like, who does the decision making in the household? Oh, whoever's earning at a given time. Even if there is also that perception that men should work, should be able to provide for the family. But in an urban context, especially in informal settlements, it's usually who's earning at a given time, right? But the issue here too is that the impact of climate change, environmental stress, even COVID-19 is more profound with women, because they are usually tasked to do a lot of the household chores, caring for the elderly, caring for the children. So the impact and the burden of time is usually, it's where women are most affected, even if the men are not working. So basically it's the whole entire research was to look at these gender dynamics and consider that in terms of policy making. So I'm not really sure if that answered your question, but
yeah, no, that filled in some of the lines. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Great. Do we have any other questions?
I see Notkar having a hand.
Who having a hand? Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, please. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the presenters, and my question will be in French, so to make this panel bilingual. Ma question est adressée à professeur Laila de l'Université de Mesure d'Agadir. J'ai suivi avec beaucoup d'attention votre présentation et je me demande, est-ce que l'association ADAR SUSMASA collabore avec le secteur privé, notamment pour qu'on puisse assurer un engagement des entreprises dans ces efforts au fin de la protection de l'environnement. Donc, c'est une question en fait qui me permettrait de comprendre, est-ce qu'on constate désormais des liens un peu plus étroits entre le secteur privé et puis les associations engagées dans le domaine environnemental. Merci.
Oui, bonjour. Merci pour votre question. Pour les collaborations d'ADAR SUSMASA avec le secteur privé, oui, il y a des prémices, en sachant que l'association est la création de cette association est très récente. Et c'est vrai que nous nous sommes focalisés surtout sur les autorités, le secteur public, les ministères, les décideurs d'une manière générale en matière d'environnement, en matière de politique de la ville, etc. Donc, on essaye de les convaincre, de les persuader du bon fondé du fait que le verdissement des villes aura un effet très, très positif, non seulement sur le bien-être, sur la pollution, sur la qualité de l'air, mais surtout sur le climat à long terme. Et nous avons réussi pas mal de rencontres avec les décideurs au niveau de la région Souss-Massa. Donc, on avait organisé un atelier qui avait rassemblé tous les représentants des ministères, de pas mal d'organismes qui sont dans le secteur, que ce soit l'environnement, l'éducation nationale, etc. Et nous sommes on a commencé à collaborer avec pas mal d'entre eux. Pour le secteur privé, on a quelques enseignes qui cherchent à trouver une légitimité environnementale, on va dire, et donc qui nous ont contactés, que ce soit au niveau du Maroc ou au niveau de l'Europe, qui veulent passer par notre association pour améliorer leur empreinte carbone. Parce que il faut savoir que on travaille au niveau d'Adar Souss-Massa, d'abord avec Adar Maroc, mais aussi avec Ad3 aux États-Unis. Et donc, c'est à ce niveau-là que nous avons élaboré une stratégie de compensation carbone. Et donc, il y a 3 sociétés pour le moment qui nous ont contactés pour ça. Et nous sommes en train de travailler sur comment faire pour... Donc, ils proposent de planter des arbres au niveau du Maroc. Et c'est à l'association d'estimer la compensation carbone que facilite ou que favorise cette opération de plantation, et donc estimer l'impact sur le bilan carbone. Voilà, merci.
Yes.
Merci. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this is Tonton. So I am supposed to be the co-panel chair, so I was not able to join from the beginning. So thank you so much, Doug, for running the whole session. So I have a few questions. So the first one would be to Laila. Je parle en français pour ça parce que la présentation était en français. Est-ce que y a-t-il par rapport à vos objectifs ou bien en fait le champ des recherches, est-ce que y a-t-il d'autres alternatives à part l'arbre? Parce que je comprends que la modulation du climat urbain tel que vous l'avez pensé, c'est surtout en fonction de l'arbre. Voilà pourquoi vous avez présenté quelques éléments par rapport à cela. Mais pour les régions, par exemple, de manière générale, qui sont touchées par les sécheresses, qui n'ont certainement pas, en fait, où il y a beaucoup de défis par rapport aux arbres. Je ne sais pas s'il y a d'autres alternatives. Donc, c'est quelque chose que je voudrais, en fait, je voudrais avoir votre perspective par rapport à ça. So my second question, I just want to ask all of them, and then they can answer afterward. So my second question will be for Kamir. I hope I'm pronouncing well. So your presentation was very interesting. So, but I was wondering when I was listening, when you're talking about the lack of communication on climate change, I'm not sure, is it because is it too technical for the the general public. Maybe sometimes we talk about climate change, but other people, they don't get the sense of that, or maybe because of politicians, some of them, they're just downplaying this, or maybe it could be also on the side of journalists, because if they see that maybe it's one of the topic that the audience, they don't have so much audience, or the public is not very interested. So because beyond the fact that you want to communicate, but you also want to make sure that people are very interested in listening what you broadcasting or sharing news. I was watching like a French channel, TV5, and then also, or maybe why in European Union, so most of the broadcast or TV, they broadcast less information about European Union than the United States. But sometimes if there's any information about the president of the US, they're probably gonna give more news on that, less than when they broadcast, when there's any issue happening in Europe. Sometimes it could be also the audience not really interested on the topic. So I just want to get your perspective on that. Maybe that can help on the way people can be looking into the climate change or the perception. So and last perspective on that is, maybe people will get the sense of climate change if we have consequences, as when we've been dealing with the pandemic, the COVID, you see, because we've been all in such the world was in such a big mess, so everyone has focused attention, know that this is a really issue that all of us, or all countries, or even the people homeless, they know that we've been going through the pandemic, and then they've been following some guidance. So maybe people just want to wait until we have consequences like this before we can have this kind of situation. So these are the two questions that I want to share. I just want to have your perspective. Thank you.
Okay, well, I should probably let Professor Amraoui start, because your first question was for her.
D'accord, merci pour votre question. Donc, la question de Monsieur Mundele, elle est composée de deux parties. Donc, il y a une partie par rapport à pourquoi on s'est focalisé sur l'arbre comme solution pour lutter contre les effets de l'urbanisation, contre le climat urbain. Et donc, la deuxième partie concerne la sécheresse. Je n'ai pas compris, qu'est-ce qu'il entend par la sécheresse d'une manière générale ou dans la ville? Est-ce que il veut parler, est-ce que vous voulez parler de, je sais pas, la sécheresse agricole ou climatique ou hydrique? Je voudrais juste mieux comprendre la question pour pouvoir répondre. Donc, en attendant, je commence pour la première partie de ma réponse. Donc, je me permets un petit rappel de ma présentation. Donc, ma présentation, elle portait en fait sur l'urbanisation et comment elle impacte le climat de la ville, donc le climat urbain, et par conséquent, le climat d'une manière générale. Et donc, j'ai parlé de ces... les aspects les plus marquants du climat urbain qui impactent donc le cycle de l'eau, le vent et surtout le cycle ou le bilan thermique. Et en fait, à partir du moment où on a posé le diagnostic, on cherche les solutions, et il se trouve bien sûr qu'il y a plusieurs solutions. Il y a par exemple les surfaces aquatiques, parce qu'elles permettent de rafraîchir la température, etc. Il y a aussi la solution qui consiste à jouer sur l'albédo pour réguler le bilan radiatif. Et donc, troisièmement, il y a la solution de la végétation qui est donc les études jusqu'à présent ont montré que c'est la solution la plus efficace, et c'est pour cette raison qu'on se concentre sur la végétation et sur l'arbre plus spécifiquement. Après, pour la sécheresse, est-ce que vous pouvez m'expliquer mieux?
Oui, en fait, je voulais dire les régions qui sont frappées par la sécheresse, par exemple, de manière générale. En fait, il y a vraiment beaucoup de défis pour avoir assez d'arbres, mais voilà pourquoi je parlais. Est-ce qu'il y aurait-il d'autres alternatives pour des régions qui seraient frappées par la sécheresse?
Oui, d'accord, c'est vrai. Donc, c'est par rapport à la solution de la végétation, du verdissement. C'est vrai que c'est un problème qui se pose très, très sérieusement, même pour la région où je suis installée, où nous voulons commencer à à travailler par rapport aux objectifs, que ce soit au niveau de la recherche scientifique, au niveau du travail associatif. C'est une zone semi-aride, donc le manque d'eau est frappant. Et justement, nous sommes en train on collabore aussi avec la RAMSA, qui est l'organisme qui s'occupe de la distribution de l'eau potable, etc. Il y a des projets aussi au niveau du sud du Maroc, un projet qui est opérationnel maintenant, c'est le dessalement des eaux salées de la mer. Et donc, c'est parmi les solutions, mais voilà, c'est vrai qu'il y a toujours ce compromis à chercher, à respecter entre vouloir verdir, planter des arbres et trouver l'eau pour les arroser. C'est c'est un objectif, c'est un équilibre assez difficile à trouver, mais on travaille pour ça. Voilà.
Merci.
I can answer your question, Dr. Mundele. It's a very good question. You know, really the problem is that the climate crisis, which is the biggest threat that humanity faces in the 21st century, is a crisis that unfortunately has been very poorly communicated to the general public. The world has known for decades, scientists have known for decades, fossil fuel industry has known for decades that taking fossil fuels out of the Earth's crust and burning them and emitting CO2 is going to cause a warming of the planet. We have known this for decades. Yet the way that this problem has been communicated has been highly problematic. And it is not out of a place of ill will. I think the scientific community rightly thought in the 1980s and 1990s that if we just provide the scientific information to the public about the climate crisis, that people would take action on this issue, governments would take action on this issue. And of course, that's not what's happened, because here we are in 2021, there are over 400 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere, and the world is getting hotter and hotter, and the entire Northern Hemisphere is on fire right now. So the challenge with climate change, you asked if it's technical, is that it is a problem that is very difficult for human psychology to wrap its head around. In measure, it is because it is a technical problem. I outlined 3 reasons in my presentation. CO2 is invisible. Up until recently, climate change has felt like a distant threat that happens far off in time and far off in geographic space, although that is rapidly changing, as we've seen with the floods in Germany and the forest fires in Canada. But you know, there's also the lack of it feeling personal. It doesn't feel personal. It feels like it's a problem that's too big for one person to fix. And often there isn't immediate gratification for taking climate action. I can stop driving my car tomorrow, but I will not see the impact on climate change right away, but I will see the impact in terms of the loss of convenience. So for all of these reasons, climate change is a psychologically difficult problem for humans to wrap their heads around. This is not the case for COVID-19. This is not the case even for the ozone layer problem. These are problems that are easy to conceptualize. COVID is an easy problem to conceptualize. It feels personal, it feels immediate, and we know what we can do about it. Climate does not feel personal, it does not feel immediate, although that's changing, and we don't know what we can do about it. So it's a very difficult problem to communicate. And so you're right, technical is one part of it. So the challenge is then, what do we do? How do we communicate it well? And like I said in my presentation, a lot of it is understanding that there are different audiences for climate change. I think there's an assumption, including among journalists, that there's just one audience for climate. But we know that there are very, very different audiences, depending on your cultural background, depending on your political worldview, depending on your socioeconomic status. So effectively communicating climate change, first and foremost, depends on understanding exactly which audiences we're communicating to. For example, are they alarmed by the crisis, or are they less interested by the crisis? Because that understanding who your audience is demands a totally different communications approach. And so I think the world, the scientific community, is starting to learn some of the intricacies, which are social, psychological, cognitive, not just scientific, in terms of communication. And I would just say that, yes, it is very unfortunate that what is essentially a problem of science has become a political issue in some countries around the world. The United States, Australia, Canada, Great Britain, to name 4.